20th century was the worst century for Christian martyrs of Christian history, all the previous centuries combined. There were more martyrs in the 20th century than any other time.
I know many of us wonder, how did Europe, once the bedrock of Christianity, become a spiritual wasteland? And what can we as Christians do to spark revival in Europe today? These are not just abstract questions. They strike at the heart of our history and our future. And that's exactly what we are going to look at together today. In the first clip, Bishop Barron highlights one of the key reasons to Europe's decline. Let's listen.
One tragedy, let's say the 20th century, if you have World War I and World War II, yes, there are anti-Christian elements to be sure. I mean, Hitler is deeply anti-Christian. But you also had French Christians killing German Christians, killing Canadian Christians, killing American Christians, killing Russian Christians. It was this massive Christian slaughter bench. And my pet theory is when you go to Europe today, especially parts of Europe, and you see a kind of spiritual wasteland, I think that's a big part of it. Is
I agree completely.
We're just recovering from this horrific outbreak of Christian on Christian violence. The gospel, did that get into anybody's mind and heart in the 20th century that allowed this orgy of violence to take place?
As Bishop Barron explains, one major cause of Europe's spiritual collapse was Christians turning on each other in the 20th century, whole nations fighting and committing terrible acts against fellow believers. When a society tolerates that level of evil inside its families and churches, healing does not come quickly. It takes generations. And scripture itself warns us of this danger. Judges 19 tells the story of a Levite and his concubine who stop in Gibeah. An old man takes them in, and that night wicked men surround the house and demand to abuse the Levite. To save himself, he sends out his concubine, who is assaulted throughout the night and collapses dead at dawn. In his outrage, the Levite cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends them throughout Israel. This sparks a civil war that nearly wipes out the tribe of Benjamin. The nation is left shattered and traumatized for years. That biblical story is a haunting image of how internal evil and infighting destroy a people from within, leaving the scars that echo through generations. And I believe that is precisely what happened to Europe and tragically what we continue to see in our world today. From here, Bishop Barron draws our attention to another sobering reality. In the next clip, he reflects on Pope Leo XIII, who had a vision that the 20th century would be the century of the devil, and he urged Catholics all over the world to pray the St. Michael prayer as spiritual protection. Let's listen.
You could do the Leo XIII, who gave us the St. Michael prayer and who supposedly had a intuition or a sense that the 20th century would belong to the devil. And to my mind, it's kind of hard to argue with that. If you believe in the devil, as I do, and you see what happened in the 20th century, it's kind of hard to imagine it wasn't to some degree.
Well, nuclear weapons are proof, as far as I can tell.
I know. I mean, the mass destruction, mass death of the 20th century.
Pope Leo XIII?
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean? He had this sense?
He had a mystical experience of the devil would have a unique control over the 20th century. And so he formulates the famous St. Michael prayer that we still pray in many churches, asking for the protection of Michael the Archangel.
When did he have this experience?
Toward the end of his life. So he died 1903, so it would have been like around 1900, so late 19th century. And many would say, well, it was borne out by the 20th century.
I would...
To add some background here, in 1884, after celebrating Mass in Vatican, Pope Leo XIII suddenly froze at the foot of the altar. His face grew pale, his eyes fixed on something unseen, and he stood motionless for nearly 10 minutes as though in a trance. Witnesses were alarmed, and when he finally came to, he explained that he had overheard a chilling exchange between Christ and Satan. The devil boasted that he could destroy the church if granted more power and 100 years to do it. Christ, in a mysterious allowance, permitted the trial. Shaken to his core, Pope Leo XIII went straight to his office, locked the door, and within an hour composed the powerful prayer to St. Michael the Archangel. From that moment forward, he was convinced the 20th century would be the century of the devil. And when we look back at 2 world wars, the sexual revolution, radical feminism, legalized abortion, communism spreading across nations, and even the shadow of atomic bomb, it's hard not to see his vision as frighteningly accurate. And yet, here lies the tragic irony. Even though this warning came from a pope, many Catholic theologians in the 20th century began dismissing the devil altogether, reducing him to a mere symbol rather than a real being. It was in this climate of skepticism that Bishop Barron was formed. And in the next clip, he explains what ultimately convinced him of the devil's real existence.
Like, for me, in my own lifetime, when I was a young guy going through school, we were still very much formed by a more liberal Catholic view. The devil, literary device, a symbol, for evil. Don't take it literally. It's not
You were
real.
taught that?
Yeah. It was sort of the standard view. But you know what really convinced me powerfully of the devil's reality was the sex abuse scandal. Because you look at the sex abuse scandal, which has haunted almost the whole of my priesthood. It broke in Chicago in the early 90s. I was ordained in 1986. So most of my priesthood has been under the shadow. The clergy sex abuse scandal has adversely affected the church in every possible way. And when you look at it and you say, could that have just been an accident or just human folly and sin? It seemed to have been so designed by a wicked mind that wanted to undermine the church. But then, now look at the whole 20th century and the level of destruction and degradation. It's hard for me to imagine it's just because of political forces or cultural.
I agree more.
What he says is absolutely right. When you consider the devastation caused by the sex abuse scandal, it's hard to believe it was merely the result of a few individuals acting on twisted impulses. The scandal didn't just bankrupt the church, it shattered her credibility as a moral authority. It led countless priests to question their vocations. It drove generations of children and families away from their faith. To think all that destruction came solely from a handful of disordered men is simply not convincing. It seems far more likely that a darker, more intelligent power was at work behind the scenes, orchestrating the chaos. And remember, one of the devil's greatest deceptions is to convince people he doesn't exist. Because once his existence is denied, all that remains is endless finger-pointing and infighting. Which brings us to Bishop Barron's final challenge. How should Christians respond to evil in our lives, in our communities, and in our world? Do we cover and fear and remain passive, or do we rise up and march confidently against the very gates of hell? Let's listen.
We mustn't forget what we were saying earlier. Where sin abounds, grace abounds the more. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. That image too, I don't know why, but for most of my life, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which means somehow hell is going to come against us, but we're going to win the battle. But that's not what it means. The gates would be the weakest point of a city wall. And so when you're attacking a city, you go after the gates. So what the Lord is saying is, no, you're not defensive here. You're on the march. You're on the offensive, and the gates of hell will not prevail against you. You're going to win. You're invading hell, and it's not going to prevail against you. So it's like not a cowering, like, oh, we'll put up a good defense, and I guess we're going to...
Yeah, or move as far away from hell as we can.
We are on the march.
Move to the suburbs.
No, but see, one of the problems is when Christians forget that and they hand the world over to pure secularism or whatever, well, of course we're not going to do well in the battle. But when Christians know, our job is to be fully engaged in this great struggle. And we're going after you, hell. We're coming after hatred, violence, stupidity, superstition, scapegoating. We're going after you. We're on the march. When I was coming of age, we didn't have that language.
And that challenge forces us to re-examine our understanding of Christ's words. Like many of you, I used to believe that when Jesus said, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, he was speaking of the devil and his forces launching an assault on the church. I thought the church, battered and bruised, would simply stand its ground and somehow manage to survive the onslaught. That's the way I carried the verse in my head for years, until I heard Bishop Barron's explanation and suddenly realized I had it completely backwards. For gates are not instruments of attack, but of defense, which means the image is not of a frightened church covering in the shadows while hell presses forward, but of a militant and courageous church marching boldly toward the very strongholds of darkness. What Christ is declaring is this: when his people rise in faith and advance with the gospel, the gates of hell themselves will not be able to withstand the assault. And that changes everything. It transforms our mindset from fear into boldness, from passivity into mission, from mere survival into a courageous advance against the very powers that seek to enslave the world. I hope this video is helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.